today with a very legendary Arizona person, Bill Turney. Bill has some great stories, a great history of drag racing in Arizona through their early days, and we're lucky to have him come and visit with us today. Welcome, Mr. Legend.
Thank you.
It's good to have you here. So, where are you originally from? Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in south central Iowa on a dairy farm, and my health was not good, and it was a cold, damp area, and my dad was, since he was a farmer, he worked his ass off, and he was having arthritis, bursitis problems, so we moved to Phoenix in '57, and at 15, I was 5 feet tall. And I moved to Phoenix and I grew 6 inches the first year.
Fantastic.
Because I wasn't sick anymore. And, but I was bored. It was, you grew up on a farm. You work, you have chores. It's just the way life is.
Farmer's life.
And when I got to Phoenix, it was like, what? There's nothing to do. So I came from a town that was a little over 1,000 people. And where we moved in with my aunt and uncle, who lived at 16th Street and I can't remember exactly, 16th Street. Went to North High, there was 4,000 kids. I was overwhelmed. So we bought a house in Sunny Slope and moved there, and the school was smaller, and I got along with that pretty good. But had 2 auto shop classes every day, because on a farm we fixed everything. So that was a natural thing, and I liked cars. But I didn't know anything about drag racing. I'd never even heard of it. The first hot rod magazine I bought was the one with Tommy Ivo's T-Bucket on the cover. I thought that was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. So I got into photography, took into photography classes. And one of our assignments was to photograph a sporting event. Well, I never played sports. I was too small. And we lived out in the country. So you'd go home to do your chores. And if you were in sports, you had to stay. Because first I went to a country school, and then they closed that, and then I started going to town to school. But so I'd read about drag racing, didn't know anything about it. But I thought, well, I'll go stand. So I had my dad drive me to Mel Larson's, the one on Litchfield and Grand Avenue.
The original one.
Yeah. And so we parked, and he said, well, I'm just going to stay here. So I wandered off into the pits with my camera hanging around my neck, which was a school loaner. And I walk into the pits, and the first person I see, I didn't know who it was, but it was Larry Steininger. It was hard to miss him. He was bent over working on the Chrysler. And so I'm standing there, and he saw me, and he said, do you have any questions? I said, I don't know anything. I don't even know what to ask. He said, this is the first time you've been. It's the first time I've ever been to a drag race in my life. He said, well, come back in a half hour, and I'll sit down and talk to you about it. So I wandered around and came back. And we sat down on the trailer, and he walked me through everything. I thought that was amazing, And then he took me around and introduced me to people like Jimmy Stewart. Jimmy had a rear engine Oldsmobile dragster. They narrowed the rear end so they could put it in a pickup. They didn't have a trailer. And he worked at Pasco Gear with Joe Dillon, who was the motor genius behind the Money Olds car that Buddy Sampson drove. Well, at that time, Buddy was driving for Larry. That was before Albert got into it. I talked to Albert last night, and he said, 59 or 60 when he started driving for Larry. But so I got hooked on drag racing and fuel. You know,
So the right thing, and you just, when you went in, you went all the way to the top.
yeah,
Start with your interest, when you were in the fast cars.
yeah. And the smell and the noise and the speed, you know, that whole thing. And that was before single lane timing. So you had people at the finish line visually saying who the winner was. And at any rate, so as I'd been, earlier than that, I'd been pedaling my bicycle around the neighborhood because we lived on 12th Street North of Northern. And I ended up south of there. And there's this guy had a dragster in his carport. And that was Kenny Meredith. And he had bought it from, oh shit, it'll come to me in a minute anyway. And so I kept going back there watching him work on that because I thought that was pretty fascinating. And I met a guy who was a neighbor there, and Mike Alvey lived in the same neighborhood. And the other guy I met was just a guy that lived down the street. Well, it turned out he had gone to high school with Dick Wells, who was, at that time, the first editor of National Dragster.
Right.
And so they were having a big race. I think it was 61 at Larson's. I mean, just everybody in the world was there. And Dick Wells came to cover that. And this guy introduced me to him. And so I'm spitting speeds and ETs and telling him about all the different things. So what I didn't know was he was getting ready to leave NHRA, and he and Ray Brock were going to start the National Street Rod Association using Wally's business model. So he was trying to find somebody to replace him. So he asked me if I'd be interested in it. Maybe. So I went to California and stayed with him for 2 weeks. And he was everything at National Dragster. I mean, he was the photographer, the writer. They did all the stuff with the Verityper. And so he sent me to cover a race in Inyakern, which now is a long ways out. Then it was forever to get there. And I finally told him, I'm not a writer. He said, well, I'll stay with you for a while and help you. Because he was really wanting to get out of there more than I knew. And I thought, I said, I can take the pictures, I can capture the pictures, I can tell a story, but I can't write it. I'm not a good writer. So I declined the job and I was about to get married. So I got married, which we've been married now for 63 years. So
Congratulations.
that was a good choice.
Yes, it was.
And my wife was born and raised in Phoenix. She didn't like LA, and I wasn't particularly fond of it. I just didn't care for it. But later on, I used to go once a month to LA to one of the tracks and take pictures because all I got in Phoenix was just the Phoenix stuff. And there were a lot of other drag strips in Arizona, but there was, they really weren't big races. A lot of stock cars, some gassers, an occasional drag strip, like Winslow and Casa Grande and Davis Mountain and the old Tucson drag strip up the street here. And so I finally, I don't know exactly, late 60s or early 70s is when I quit. And we moved to Tucson in 1976. And I could hear when they'd have a big race at the old Tucson drag strip. I lived at Fort Lowell and Houghton, which was, the sound would come all the way up. On the front porch, I could hear it. But I had a little boy at that time, and so I thought, well, we'll drive down there. Well, he had tubes in his ears, and we were parked on the road north of the drag strip, and when they run a fuel car, we just tortured him. So we just left enough of that. So I was basically out of it at that point. And then, and the only person I knew in Tucson was Red Graff, other than the people that worked for me. And they had a contest when I was in high school it was a deal that Arizona Highways put on, and you had to take a bad negative and make a good print, and then send them the negative and the print. Well, I got an interview to be a lab tech because I was skilled in the darkroom. What it turned out was, at that time, they were still doing some black and white in Arizona Highways. And all the color separations and all of that was all done in Wisconsin, where they printed the magazine. But we did the halftones for the black and whites. So the guy was getting ready to retire. So he taught me how to do that. So I became very good at that too. And 8 months into that job, the place in Wisconsin said, we'll just do it all. So suddenly no job. Well, I'd been there more than 6 months. So the state said, well, we'll find you another job. So I got a job as the lab tech for the photographer for the highway department, which was basically taking, he went out and took pictures of where they were going to build a highway and the construction, and I would print them. We had a girlfriend in one of the adjoining departments, and their favorite thing was to go play in the darkroom. So I'd be in the middle of something and stop. So they'd do their thing, and then I'd go next door and hang out in the reproduction department, which is where J.R. Bloom worked.
Oh my, yeah.
And I had known him from taking pictures, but so they had an opening, so I took that job just to get away from the other situation. Well, a few months into that, I realized I don't want to do this the rest of my life. I mean, they scheduled their sick days so nobody would have to work too hard. And I thought, I don't want to turn into that, It wasn't the way I was put together.
The farmer.
Yeah. So I'm thinking, how can I get out of here? Well, the guy that ran the place didn't like you to become a printing press operator because as soon as they do, they'd go get a job somewhere. So they had this old photostat machine. Remember when all the legal documents were black with white writing?
Mm-hmm.
That's because every time you take the picture, it reverses. Well, they had this, it was an antique machine, but every county seat in Arizona had one. And this thing would break and I'd fix it. Like lots of people don't know, you put dissimilar metals together and it'll eat them. We had a squirrel cage in it where you'd take the picture and it would run into it for the developing. Well, I put it together with brass screws. It would eat the brass screws up. So I went down to, I think it was Phoenix Molten Screw or something like that. I took them down. I said, I want these, but I want them in stainless. So I put it back together with stainless. It never broke again. So then we got a Xerox machine. So I was heckling the salesman, if they had any jobs. And so I went down for 2 or 3 interviews, and then they called me again, wanting to come down after work. And I thought, I think they're just screwing with me. I almost didn't go. What they wanted me to do was fill out the paperwork to start working there.
That's awesome.
So I was the 6th technician in the state of Arizona. And we were a remote sales office out of San Diego. Well, the first thing I had to do was go to service all these old, They were called haloid rectograph machines, but they also called them photostat machines. So I had to go to every county and fix all of those. And we used to have smaller machines, and we'd deliver them in the back seat of our company cars. And when I retired from Xerox, I was running the southern half of the state, and I had 42 tech reps working for me. So, yeah, I mean, it grew big. But now it's back small again.
Yes.
They've screwed it up.
Like, well, very much so. Like 3M has done on some of the stuff. How about Polaroid?
Yeah.
Kodak. The Kodak's gone. It's just.
Well, Kodak thought film would last forever,
Mm-hmm.
and it didn't.
Yep.
And Xerox was making so much money, they were sloppy management. And you could see that from the inside. Like we had the first business computer, but a Commodore 64 had more power. And this thing was big and heavy. Then they bought the company that made the 8-inch floppy disks. 2 months later, they came out with a 5 1/4. I mean, they would do, like, Magnavox invented the fax machine. We bought that. But we didn't know what to do with it. I mean, everything that it was associated with was, I mean, we had it. You could fill out this paperwork, and it would print a check on check paper in another part of the United States. So everything about the facsimile machine was associated with money. But again, Xerox didn't know what to do with it. So they let it slip through their fingers. And like I had a partner in that business, and he used to say, they just keep rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic thinking it's not going to sink.
That's big corporate America. But again, it provided you with the ability to do your other stuff, which you love, your photography and being around the racers. And you got to go around the state. I'm sure you knew some racers all at different corners of the state. And
oh yeah.
So I heard a rumor.
Okay.
And I don't know if it's true, but I know you take a lot of great photography. You got great, awesome drag racing pictures. But something about sitting suspended from a cable at Tucson Dragway?
No.
Where was this?
It was Beeline.
Beeline, okay.
The cable that held the starting light.
Okay.
I come up with this idea because all the photographers were kind of in a quiet competition with each other, trying to come up with something unusual, which is what that came from. And so I come up with this idea, kind of a bosun's chair, and Bones put it together for me because I couldn't weld. And it was made out of 3/4 inch conduit, and we used Chrysler head bolts and bent them to make hooks. And I would put the thing up, and then I would climb up with a ladder and get in it over by the pole outside the track, and then move it across till I'd get. And my idea was this picture, and I took hundreds before I got what I wanted. And the idea was that was right when the cars were starting to go 200. And the idea was to get the front of the car blurry and then back with the motor and the driver to be clear. And the idea was this is the car going over 200. That's why it's blurry in the front. Well, this is a black and white print off of the color. And I have one that's framed that shows the whole deal, except I couldn't find it. I'm packing to move to Maryland.
Oh, no.
So
we're going to miss you.
Well, I'm not very active anymore with most things. Our son and his wife and 2 grandsons live there. And I'm 83 now. And I got all sorts of little weird things wrong with me. I mean, I had cancer, I beat that. I had a stroke, I beat that. Parkinson's, there's no cure for. But I'm in the early stages of it. So my voice is affected. I don't get the tremors very often. But my back is so bad. That's why I have to use that cart. I just can't walk.
You've you're very inspiring about all the things you've been through, and you just keep coming through it. You had a lot of great days in your photography. I mean, you're kind of you're not blowing your horn. You know, you were a great photographer. You were the first of a lot of different images. You figured a way to get things done. What did you like the most about drag racing through the years? What do you remember? What would you say?
People. It was always the people. You know, from the first introduction, like when I met Steiniger, and he treated me like he'd known me my whole life. And then I got to go racing with him sometimes to California. I was like the little brother. And then I worked for Jack Sneff when he did Deer Valley. And I got to go to California with him. And so I'd come back to high school from a weekend of racing at Long Beach. And we may have gone, I went to Howard's Cams, I went to Schieffer, I went to Harmon Collins, went to Wyand. I went all these places that manufacture this stuff.
All iconic industries.
And I'd come back with these pictures, and I'd be printing them at school. And they'd say, "Where'd you do that?" "Oh, I went to California last weekend. We were racing," and blah, blah, blah. They were just spellbound, you know. How'd you do that? Well, because Larry and Jimmy Stewart and other people befriended me. So I was hanging out with them, and they all were married and had kids. And so I just kind of gravitated from high school to that. I never got really involved with much in high school.
I had in high school, auto shop teacher. Do you remember a guy named Joe McKee?
Yeah.
Joe McKee kind of let me tag along and take me places. And he went like Jim Gusick and other people. He was really great he brought people along to learn the sport and learn about it. And I was with Joe at the end of his front motor car. That's when he started building the rear motor car. Well, we go to the races. We come down here to Tucson or go places racing. And I shot people. "What'd you do this weekend?" "Oh, I went to the races." You know, but I told him a lot. He goes, he didn't believe me. He never believed I was involved with the sport. And, you know, but the thing is, the people was fantastic, and it's always about including people.
Yeah.
Drag racing has always been good about inclusion of everybody, no matter what your race is, no matter what your gender is. You're interested, we want you on board with us.
Well, did you see that interview with Tony Stewart where he was talking about drag racing compared to NASCAR? And he said, there's no comparison. The old NASCAR, yes.
Yes.
The new NASCAR, no. But like he was saying, he and Leah and their baby were hanging out, and the next motorhome was the Capco kid, Steve Torrance,
Right.
and his wife and 2 daughters. And he was going, the next day we want to kick each other's ass, but we're just having a good time as people.
Where else but drag racing would you lend the guy you're going to race in the next round your extra parts so he can race you?
Yeah.
That wouldn't happen anywhere else, but drag racing it does.
Yeah. Yeah, I just saw a deal last night. It was that street racing thing, and the guy blew a front tire. We didn't have a spare. So another guy said, well, mine are a different size, so we'll just take both of mine and put them on your car. Because they were racing, that group from Memphis and Oklahoma and that bunch, they were racing guys from California.
Right.
So it's like, whatever it takes to beat California, we'll do it. And I thought, that's the old way.
That's right.
And
I remember you, since you lived in both Phoenix and Tucson, the rivalry between Phoenix and Tucson racers. We'd fight each other, but we'd be like brothers if we went to California.
Right.
It was like, in Phoenix and Tucson, no. But you go out of state, and we're all Arizona racers.
Exactly. So it's always, to me, been about the people and the background of the people and what they do for a real living and who they know. And it's interesting. Yeah, what I'm doing now, I'm cleaning up my mess. Because what I used to do is I would go to a race, I'd take 10 rolls or more, and then I'd go through them and I'd figure out what I was going to send to Drag Sport Illustrated and to Drag News, and occasionally, until they started doing AHRA in Arizona, then National Dragster wouldn't take anything. But then I'd see, this looked like a pretty good picture. They might want to buy that, and I'd print a couple. What if they didn't buy it? So I got all these negatives, and they're in absolutely no order. And when Bob Post wrote that high performance book, he had put an ad in National Dragster that he was looking for pictures. Well, I traveled a lot when I worked for Xerox, and I had so many frequent flyer miles, it was nuts. So we tried to fly on America West because it was an Arizona company. Well, they looked like they were going to go broke. So I was burning these things up. So I took my mom and took her back to Iowa and did a bunch of that. And then I took my mother-in-law to West Virginia and dropped her off for the summer. So I went back to D.C. and met with Post at the Museum of Science and Industry. And he's the one that got Garlett's Dragster in there. He got the race cars in there. And so he brings this list, and it's double-spaced, single column, bunch of paper. So I said, can I write on this? He said, yeah. I said, I'll just put some check marks. So he said, you've got all those? I said, yeah. I said, the good news, I got them. The bad news is they're in no order. So I sent him a whole bunch of old prints, and he used some of them in that book.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So anyway, all my pictures are going to go to Don Ewald so that he can scan them and put what he thinks is worthy on We Did It for Love.
Yeah.
And because otherwise, if I died tomorrow, they'd probably all just get thrown away.
I'm glad you added that. Yeah, and Ewald does a lot of stuff like that. And, you know, the history. That's why we try to get these videos.
Yeah,
they know who you were. You know, they can put a face to the name. And, you know.
Yeah, and his health is not great, but he can't find anybody to take that deal over. I mean, so I don't know what's going to happen to it.
I've seen through Facebook, he went through some medical stuff as well. So
yeah,
that's good. You know, we still have him with us, and we appreciate what he does too. So
yeah, I talk to him probably once a month. You know, my wife always said, you've got the collection of the strangest friends I've ever seen. I said, I like different. If people are a little different from everybody else, I'm interested in them.
There you go.
What makes them tick? Why are they different?
What the stories they have to tell.
You know, and with that, a color version of that was on the cover of, I think it was Popular Hot Rodding. I don't remember exactly, but it was June of '64.
Okay.
And see, this one I cropped where you can't see the starting line. They printed it you could see the starting line. So that they didn't care about my idea of entering the two. You know, this was the car just crossing into the 200-mile-an-hour range. That's why it was blurry. But I shot hundreds of pictures like that till I got the one I wanted. And the only one of those guys that's left is Spider. All the rest of them are dead. Red Lawn.
You got him on film.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And Joanna Horry, who really was the creator of the software to build the all-aluminum Hemis for racing. And he just died a few years ago, but Spider's still going strong.
Well, they say nobody gets out alive.
Well, that's what Tony Waters said. It's a race we're all going to finish. We just don't know when.
That's right.
And the thing is, you got to make the best out of every day and every experience. I mean, like one year, shortly after I was married, Charlie Brown, Bones, myself, and I think it was Bill Costianis. We went to the AHRA Nationals in Green Valley. And so I told my wife I wanted to go, and she threw a hissy fit. And her mother said, at least he's not in the bar. You know where he's at. Well, we did do some bars, but none of us had any money. So we'd stop at roadside stands and buy a basket of apples. We'd eat apples all day, or tomatoes, or whatever. And that was the year that, I don't remember the guy's name, he got killed there. He was driving for Vance Hunt, and he tried to miss the net, and he went beside it, and the guy wire that held it up snipped his head off, and he went, you've been to Green Valley?
No, but I've seen pictures of it, yeah.
Well, it went up a hill. Well, that didn't help slow you down any. But they had, those nets they put over the side of the ship for the soldiers to climb down. Mm-hmm. That was their catch net. Well, you hit that with a car, it just destroyed it. So this guy tried to miss it. Well, he ended up, there was a cut through the hill. He went over that and ended up in a guy's front yard full of walnut trees and played pinball bouncing around between them. Almost ended up on the guy's porch. And so I got to go to lots of those, I never forget going to Long Beach with Ted Meredith.
Your stories your memory is fantastic. I really appreciate everything you've shared with us, and thank you to your lovely wife for making sure you're here.
Yeah.
And we hope that your move to Maryland is going to be fantastic. Remember, it's a little bit colder in the wintertime than it is here.
Well, where they live, they're on the east side of the Chesapeake Bay, and the weather, when DC gets snowed in, they get a light dusting.
That's
because
good.
The weather seems to hit the Chesapeake Bay.
While you're back there, maybe you can fix some of those politicians back there. Okay? Thanks a lot.